Greetings, my friends out there everywhere. As I've said many times, I wish I could know every one of you. I meet so many people in town during the week that tell me they're seeing the show and liking it. Out having a fish dinner yesterday, and a lady came to me first. I know her face, but I couldn't tell you her name to save my life. But anyway, she said something to me that kind of made me know who she was. She was talking to her husband, who was right behind her, and she said, "This fellow's got my father's old World War I suit." Well, I remembered then that upstairs at home it is there. Then her husband came up and talked to me, and he said, "I love your show every week." I don't know who he was from Adam, but nevertheless, he said that. And then another gentleman knew I was into history, so he brought a relic around that he'd found in an old house. I think he was tearing a house down maybe, and he found this, some kind of a wrench, I don't know. Dad had one just like it, but I don't remember what it was, but it's made for a purpose, special kind of a wrench. Anyway, it's a pleasure always to meet you. And one question that is asked me real often that I can answer for you is, you don't look your age, but I hear that you're in your 80s. Well, yes, August 25th will make me 85 years old. But I have no idea of retiring. That never crosses my mind. I would never think of retiring. I intend to keep on keeping on as long as I can. And I hope that's a long time, but who knows? The calendar age would run out pretty soon. Physical age, I don't know so much about that. Psychological age, I'm still 21. So maybe I'll be here for a good while. But anyway, I've sworn to myself and made the vow that I'll spend whatever years I've got left doing just what I'm doing today, telling stories of Bristol. Not just hard history and bare facts, that doesn't interest many people, but I mix my history with stories that I think will blend well with the past. Today I want to speak to you about an incident that occurred possibly 2 or 3 miles from Bristol downtown, down in the Steel Creek Park area of this town. On my last show, I told you about an old ex-slave that made a living by carrying water from the Gilead Spring down there. Well, the Gilead Spring, the healing spring so-called, was not the only spring in those hills. You know, it's an interesting land that we have here around Bristol. We have the knobs, what they call the knobs, that makes a wedge of little mountains or hills right in the middle of Bristol. Bristol's built around it. Like part goes west, part goes the other direction, and in between there's an area that's you get in there and get out of hearing and out of sight of lights by night. Of course, you don't want to live in there at night much, but you wouldn't know but what you was 100 miles out in the country somewhere. Just unsettled land. They're beginning to build some, I don't know how for years, but most of it's very primitive out in there, just like it was for long before Bristol was ever founded. Well, around the Steel Creek Park area, there's those knobs are there. Of course, what makes the water, the creek makes a gap in those hills. And the hills start on the other side again, just like they were on the north, west, east side. Well, in those dark, foreboding hollows, there are many springs. I've never wanted to get out there and explore, but other people have. It's not unusual for someone to get lost in those hills. You could very easily. I always said, if you do, give you a word of advice, find a little stream and follow the stream. and it will usually end in a bigger stream, and that stream will usually end in a bigger one, and first thing you know, you're back into civilization. I have known people who had to do that. Well, those dark hollows around Steel Creek Park and the springs within created, shall we say, an unusual and really not unusual industry. Strangely, Bristol for many years off and on, and about all the time in its earliest years, was wide open as far as alcohol was concerned. At one point, there were 24 saloons in Bristol and only 12 grocery stores. So it appears at that time people were more thirsty than hungry. But even so, people were selling liquor on every corner downtown nearly. Moonshine was still very popular, and people asked why. I asked the question to an old informant of mine long ago, the man I mentioned in the last program, 97 years old, 61 years ago. He was one of my greatest informers, and when I wanted to know something, he was born and raised here in the Bristol town. Of course, the town wasn't but a village when he was born. He was just, it's just a small place, not so many, we couldn't call it a city at all. But anyway, I said, you know, it appears that this town always had saloons. Easy, you could go about anywhere downtown and buy liquor or something. Oh yeah, he said it was that way. He said, I remember it. And he is the one who said, here we had 24 saloons, and I can remember. And yet there was only 12 grocery stores. And some dry goods stores mixed in with them, but virtually all stores, even if they more or less were dry goods stores, would have a few groceries in them, mainly because they had to take so much produce in trade. People didn't have much money in those days, and they'd have to trade with folks about it. Well, I said, why in the world then was there so many moonshine operations going on around here? Really, I said, you know, from what I hear out in the Holston foothills, there's up every holler nearly, and bringing moonshine right into Bristol and peddling it. He said, yeah, that's right, there was. And I said, even back to Ward Benham's out here, in some of those hollows there were stills. Yes, he said, that's true. And about any direction you go, he said, if there's a good place to hide, there'd be somebody making liquor, and some people even made it in their homes, over in the kitchen fireplace, using that for a boiling place. And I know of one man who actually he wasn't purported to be moonshine whiskey. It was Dr. Scales' pain reliever, he called it. But he manufactured it right downtown at a building out back, an old outside kitchen. And he used that old fireplace in the kitchen for his boiler to be over, and had water, of course, from a well back there. And he made, it was almost pure moonshine, but he had something he put in it that destroyed the smell and the taste of it. And it turned out to be a green liquid. And he would give it to patients, and it would relieve their pain. He himself was a dentist, had a dental office in front of his building out there. And he developed a reputation of being painless when he worked on people, and that's unusual then. It's usually a horrible experience to go to a dentist. Well, my old informant said this. He said, you know, that moonshine was selling a lot cheaper than what they're selling it in the saloons. And he said, actually, it had more kick to it. He was interested in having something that had kick to it. He said, the way he expressed it, said it'll give you an experience more than what was available in the stores, or saloons rather. Well, down around Steel Creek was one of the most prominent places around here as far as moonshine whiskey being made. Up every little holler, and there's plenty of them. If you've ever walked gone the hike from Steel Creek to Rooster Front Park, I wish I could walk that. I never have, but I've waited too long now. I don't have that much stamina to walk it now. But I have some friends of mine that go there every morning and walk through and back. Well, that gives them a good opening for the day. But they'll tell you that there's many a dark hollow on every side as you go down through there. And in those dark hollows, you'll find places, not now I don't think, but they're old furnaces they call them, Lark Furnaces, where they had the boiler set up over them. Well, of course the law would get after them, and they decided, some of those people got together and decided that we'll create some kind of scare down here to keep people from hiking around here in the night when we're usually making. And he called it, well, he said that people out of night trotting wouldn't find him. And so they decided to do something that I knew well was done in the hills where I was raised. It was actually done there just like it was here. The moonshiners, often working at night, didn't want anybody out because they might spot a little light on the hill where there's flames going under their boiler. Actually, they probably didn't have any real lights, maybe a lantern or two sitting around, but they was afraid of that. So they decided on a plan to keep people from walking around down in there at night. Even hunters, it was a favorite place for hunters to go. Of course, some of those hunters had knowledge of it and had friends doing it, and it wasn't unusual for them to stop during the night and get them some drink. Well, they got some of the hunters on their side, and they put out tales, first of all, that there were all kinds of ghosts to be seen down in there. There are little family burying grounds here and there. Of course, most of them are lost. Leaves covered, 100-year leaves worth of leaves covering their graves now. And you can't even see any headstones. Most of them didn't have them. Just a rock stuck up at the head of the grave. About midway down through there, there's a fairly large family cemetery, but even now you couldn't find it unless you know exactly where it is. Covered up in brush and leaves and so on. Well, they created a ghost story about that cemetery. I told all kinds of tales about how a rider on a white horse would run right towards you and then disappear just before you ran over you. And then they'd tell about a lady in white going around screaming in the woods. You could hear her for a half a mile, screaming in the woods. They thought that would keep people from running around down there. Well, it didn't work much. People didn't scare out too bad by that. Then they created a tale about a crazy man being loose in the woods down there. You could see him once in a while just running through the woods with a big butcher knife in his hand. And I guess they hope people will finish the story and say, well, he'll slice your throat if he gets hold of it down there in the woods. And that tale might have scared a few people out, but not many. And then came what was talked of more than anything by the old-timers of Bristol, the Great Panther Scare. People were afraid of, there were actually wild panthers in this country at first. Some people call them mountain lions, and they've been known to attack people. I don't think they will unless they're real hungry, I don't know. But even in where I live, people were scared to death that a panther might appear in the woods somewhere or another. Well, they scattered that news all over town. Even the man I mentioned last week helped carry the news for him. I guess they paid him $1 or $2 about the awful panthers that were being heard in the woods. So there's just evidently a flock of them. That's not a proper word for panthers, but they called it that. Evidently a flock of them just got loose in the woods down there. And they had some calls, you'd call it, things made out of wood that would imitate whistles they could put in their mouth. And it would blow on them, and it imitated the scream of a panther. So they really went to town with that panther scare. Well, that was the most effective thing they did. The ghost didn't do too good. The crazy man in the woods didn't do too good. But when they got the panther scare going, it stopped most people traveling around there at night. Went on for years like that, until finally, for some reason, it just faded out. Well, grew up in the mountains, far back in the mountains of Arkansas, in the Ozark National Forest, and I well remember moonshiners around there would get out and spread what they call panther tales, scaring people from walking around at night. Well, you name it, if a thing can happen, it's happened in Bristol. And that's just one of the many things that's made the town unique. I love it because it's unique. I'm always looking for tales that are different. And that the great panther run of Steel Creek was still being talked about when I came here. And there were still some people that believed it was true. Well, believe it or not, it wasn't true. It's just a scare put out. I'll have a story for you next time I see you, and I hope you'll be with me. Until then, may the best in life be yours.